What if the most powerful sports league in America just lost control? Not because of a lawsuit, not because of a strike, but because of a rookie. Over the past week, online reports started circulating that Shedeur Sanders landed a massive international business deal completely outside the traditional league structure. No team approval, no league partnership, no centralized negotiation. Just a player and a global brand reaching an agreement directly. And whether every detail ends up being confirmed or not, the reaction around the football world tells you everything. Executives uneasy, fans debating, and analysts suddenly asking a question the NFL never wanted asked. What happens when players don't financially need the league anymore? For decades, the system worked a certain way. A rookie entered the league, earned a contract, and slowly built wealth through performance and endorsements the league ecosystem helped control. Teams had leverage. The league had structure. Players had patience. But this new generation didn't grow up inside that model. They arrived with audiences, businesses, sponsorships, and financial backing before ever playing a professional snap. And now, instead of waiting years to gain power, some players appear to be starting their careers with it already in their hands. That's why this story isn't really about one deal, it's about timing. The announcement dropped right as conversations about draft position, expectations, and criticism were still fresh. To some fans, it looked intentional. To others, symbolic, almost like a message. Evaluation on the field is only one part of the equation now. Because if players can build careers beyond the league's traditional pathways, then the balance between organization and athlete quietly shifts. And the moment that possibility became real, people across the sport started paying attention. But to understand why this caused such a reaction, you have to go back to the night everything changed, draft night. The night was supposed to follow a familiar script. Months of predictions, mock drafts, and debates had painted a clear picture of where Shedeur Sanders might land. Analysts talked about upside, arm talent, and pedigree. Supporters expected an early selection. Even critics assumed, at worst, a middle-round pick. But as the picks kept rolling in, his name never came. One team passed, then another, then another. By the time the later rounds approached, the conversation online had completely shifted. Instead of discussing fit or potential, people started speculating. Some said teams questioned readiness. Others suggested personality concerns. And a few believed organizations simply didn't know how to evaluate a quarterback who already arrived with a brand bigger than most rookies. Whatever the reason, the slide became the story of the draft. Fans noticed something else too, the reaction. There was no visible panic, no desperate interviews, no public frustration, just patience. Almost like someone who understood the league's timeline didn't necessarily control his own. And that's where things became interesting. Because traditionally, draft position determines leverage. Higher pick means higher investment, more opportunity, longer runway to develop. Lower pick means proving yourself quickly or disappearing. The system pressures rookies to conform fast. But observers began pointing out a different dynamic. If a player already has financial stability and a massive following before entering the league, the urgency changes. The draft stops defining survival and starts defining opportunity. So when the selection finally happened, the narrative wasn't celebration or relief. It was curiosity. People wondered whether the slide would motivate him or free him. And not long after the draft coverage faded from headlines, something happened that made that question far more complicated than anyone expected. Because instead of responding on the field first, the response came in business. Weeks passed after the draft, and the conversation cooled down. Rookie minicamps started, reporters focused on playbooks, and the usual off-season routine took over. Most late-round quarterbacks spend that time quietly learning terminology, adjusting to speed, and trying not to make mistakes in front of coaches. The spotlight normally disappears until preseason. Then, out of nowhere, social media lit up. A single post changed the entire narrative. Instead of workout clips or training photos, the announcement hinted at something much bigger, an international partnership worth more money than many veterans make in years. Not a local endorsement, not a shoe commercial, something global. And the strange part: no team press release, no league promotion, no coordinated rollout through traditional NFL channels. It looked independent. Almost immediately, fans and analysts started asking the same question: how could a rookie pull off a deal at that scale without the league being involved? Normally, sponsorships tied to the sport run through league approvals, licensing agreements, and carefully negotiated boundaries. That's been the structure for decades. Yet this one appeared to bypass all of it. Reports began circulating that the agreement positioned him as an international ambassador connected to expanding American football overseas. If true, it meant the relationship existed outside normal team salary structures. The money wouldn't depend on snaps, depth chart position, or contract incentives. Which changes everything. Because if income isn't tied directly to the team, pressure loses its power. Fines matter less. Contract leverage weakens. Negotiations look different. And suddenly, people weren't talking about where he was drafted anymore. They were talking about whether the league even saw this coming, and what it meant if they didn't. But the real twist wasn't just the size of the deal. It was how it was even allowed to happen in the first place. Buried deep inside rookie contracts are pages most fans, and honestly most players, never read closely. They focus on salary, bonuses, guarantees, and incentives. But the fine print is where the real power lies. According to reports, this situation revolved around a little-known provision related to independent marketing rights. Not team licensing, not jersey sales, not official league sponsors, personal brand activity outside direct NFL partnerships. Normally, that distinction doesn't matter. Most rookies don't have the reach or leverage to attract major international investors on their own, so the clause just sits there unused year after year, until someone actually uses it. Instead of negotiating through league channels, the camp reportedly structured the agreement as a global brand ambassadorship, meaning the player represents the growth of the sport internationally rather than promoting official NFL properties. That subtle difference is huge. Because if the deal promotes the athlete and not the league trademarks, league control weakens dramatically. It turns a restricted category into a personal business venture. And that's why insiders began calling it a loophole, not illegal, not hidden, just never fully tested at this level before. The league can regulate team activities. They can regulate official sponsorship categories. But personal international representation sits in a gray area between athlete identity and league ownership, which explains the sudden tension. If one player successfully proves he can earn franchise-level money outside football operations, then contracts stop being the primary source of power. Teams negotiate playing time, not financial survival. And that possibility spreads fast, because agents around the league watch situations like this closely. Every successful precedent becomes a template. Every template becomes leverage in future negotiations. Meaning the impact might not stay with one quarterback. It could quietly reshape how future stars enter the league entirely. And that's exactly why reactions behind closed doors reportedly escalated almost immediately. What happens publicly in sports is usually calm. Press conferences sound polite, statements sound neutral, everyone says the right thing. But privately, that's where the real emotions show up. League executives reportedly didn't learn about the agreement through negotiations. They learned the same way fans did online. And in a league built on control and centralized approval, surprises like that don't land softly. Because this wasn't just about one endorsement. It challenged the long-standing structure. The league manages partnerships, teams manage contracts, and players operate inside those lanes. Clean, predictable, organized. Now imagine a rookie stepping outside that system and proving it still works. The concern wasn't only the money, it was replication. If one player can secure a massive international deal independently, agents immediately start asking the same question. Why not others? Quarterbacks, receivers, even defensive stars with global followings suddenly become international assets rather than just team employees. And once that idea spreads, negotiating leverage changes overnight. Fines lose bite. Contract pressure weakens. Holdouts become less threatening. Not because teams lost authority, but because players gain alternatives. That's why discussions reportedly shifted toward future contract language, not to undo what already happened, but to prevent a repeat scenario. Adjust wording, redefine marketing rights, close gray areas before they become standard practice. But here's the problem with reacting after the fact. Any existing agreement that followed current rules remains protected. You can rewrite tomorrow's contracts. You can't rewrite yesterday's. Which means even if policies change moving forward, a precedent has already been set. And in professional sports, precedent matters more than intention. Because once players see a path exists, they rarely forget it. And the timing of when this became public only amplified that message. The announcement didn't just drop randomly. It landed on a day that already had attention. And in media strategy, timing can matter as much as content. When news breaks during a personal celebration, the story spreads differently. Fans aren't just reacting to a business move, they attach emotion to it. It feels intentional, almost symbolic, whether that was the plan or not. Some observers believe the date was chosen carefully, not confirmed, just widely speculated. The idea was simple: control the narrative before anyone else can. Instead of analysts debating draft position, development timelines, or roster competition, the conversation immediately shifted to influence and independence. In one moment, the discussion stopped being, "Is he ready to start?" and became, "What does this mean for the league?" That's a massive change in framing. Because athletes normally spend their rookie year trying to earn credibility. Performance first, recognition later. But a major off-field move flips that order. Credibility arrives before a single snap. And once perception changes, expectations follow. Teammates see confidence. Fans see ambition. Media sees a storyline bigger than depth charts. Whether intentional or coincidence, the timing created a narrative of control, a player defining his own spotlight rather than waiting for it. And in modern sports culture, narrative often shapes reputation faster than statistics ever could. But the ripple effect didn't stop with perception. It started affecting how people began viewing the team situation itself. Now shift the focus to the building itself. Because moves like this don't just live online. They change how a player is viewed inside the organization. Normally, a rookie walks into the locker room quietly. He learns the playbook, earns respect slowly, and avoids stepping on veteran toes. Status is tied to experience and contracts. But financial independence changes that dynamic. When a young player arrives already secure outside football, teammates notice. Not necessarily jealousy, more curiosity. It signals confidence. It says the pressure points teams traditionally use don't carry the same weight. Veterans understand leverage. Coaches understand leverage even more. If a player isn't worried about incentives, fines, or future negotiations, his focus shifts entirely to performance. Every practice rep becomes about proving ability rather than protecting opportunity. That can actually raise internal competition. Instead of competing for security, the competition becomes purely about talent. And that tends to elevate intensity across the roster, because effort can't be negotiated anymore, it's visible. Some fans interpret this as a guaranteed leadership role. Not exactly. Leadership in a locker room still comes from preparation and production, but perception matters, and perception can accelerate respect. Teammates pay attention to composure under attention. Coaches watch how distractions are handled. Front offices watch how narratives evolve. If the attention stays controlled, it becomes an asset. If it spirals, it becomes a distraction. So the real test isn't the deal itself, it's whether performance matches presence. And that's where the broader league conversation starts getting uncomfortable. At first glance, this looks like one player getting a big off-field opportunity. But the concern around the league isn't about one contract, it's about the precedent. For decades, the power structure in pro football was simple. Teams controlled contracts, contracts controlled leverage, and leverage controlled behavior. If a player wanted long-term security, he needed the organization. That dependence shaped negotiations, extensions, and even locker room dynamics. Now imagine that dependency shrinking. When outside revenue becomes comparable to football income, the pressure points change. A holdout loses meaning. A fine loses impact. Even contract timing stops being the ultimate motivator. And once one player proves it's possible, agents start studying it. They don't copy the exact deal, they copy the pathway. International partnerships, personal media platforms, independent branding. Every successful example becomes a blueprint others attempt to adapt. That's why conversations behind closed doors shift from performance to policy. Not because anyone broke rules, but because the rules suddenly feel outdated. Leagues thrive on structure. Predictability keeps negotiations orderly and competitive balance intact. But markets evolve faster than rulebooks, and global money doesn't move at committee speed. So the real tension isn't player versus team. It's tradition versus a changing business model. And the moment that shift becomes visible, the reaction usually comes quickly. So when you zoom out, this was never just about a single deal or a headline number. It was about a proof of concept. For years, players chased security through the league. Now we're seeing the first signs of players building security beside the league, and that difference changes how careers are planned from day one. The path is no longer perform first, earn later. It's build always, perform anyway. That's the blueprint. Create value that doesn't disappear after a bad season. Build an audience that doesn't depend on broadcast time. Develop partnerships that exist beyond the playbook. Once that mindset spreads, negotiations stop being survival conversations and start becoming collaboration conversations. Teams still matter, winning still matters, but financial dependence stops being the foundation of the relationship. And that's why moments like this feel bigger than one player. Because the league can adjust policies. Teams can adjust contracts. But they can't reverse awareness. Future prospects are watching closely. Agents are studying the details. Executives are quietly preparing for a different type of athlete entering the system, one who arrives not just as a player, but as a platform. So the real story isn't whether this works long-term. It's how many players follow the same path once they realize the door was never locked. It just hadn't been pushed yet.